Title of today's sermon is the Surprising Pathway to Wisdom, and it's from the Epistle to James. We're introducing that, and then later we'll each have a time to preach from that. Let me read the passage from James, and then I want to come back to that before I go to Psalm 90. Verse 2, my brothers and sisters, think of various tests you encounter as occasions for joy. After all, you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Let this endurance complete its work so that you may be fully mature, complete and lacking in nothing. But anyone who needs wisdom should ask God, whose very nature is to give to everyone without a second thought, without keeping score. Wisdom will certainly be given to those who ask. Now, I want to reflect a little bit about particularly verse 2, and I'm thinking of here's how it goes in the NIV. Dear brothers and sisters, count it all joy when you're affected. Count it all joy whenever you face trials of many kinds. Now, I'm going to launch off of that word many kinds because I'm hoping and believing that James doesn't believe we should count it all joy regardless of whatever kind of trial, all and every trial that comes our way. I'm thinking he's saying of many kinds, and I'm suggesting there are two different kinds of trials that come our way. There are those that are overwhelming. When we get a diagnosis that you have pancreatic cancer or Alzheimer's or ALS or some other overwhelming news, you may get to a point where you consider joy in the midst of that. Or as one of the saints in my Wednesday morning group said when her husband had Alzheimer's for 10 years, she said, I found myself being thankful in it, but not for it. Isn't that helpful? In it, but not for it. And forgive me if you have a different view on this, but if James were to say, be joyful for every trial, it seems to me there are some trials that would be almost masochistic or sadistic about. It seems to me that one needs some time to work through that. So I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about trials of many kinds of trials. Those that we talked about last week are too huge. They lead to depression. I'd like to try to demystify this a little bit and find a parallel in our physical world. And I found it this past Tuesday in the newspaper, Dr. Oz, when he talked about stress. And he made the distinction, chronic stress, huge, overwhelming stress can overwhelm somebody, some of us. We have to be careful of that. But then he went on to talk about, but brief blasts of stress can be helpful. And I'm using stress and trials in the same sort of sentence, same idea. And here's what the paper said, and I think this can help us. Number one, brief blasts of stress can focus our attention. It can focus our attention. So can trials. When you're going through a particularly trying time, it focuses your energy, just as stress can focus your energy. It focuses us. Second, he says, it can motivate us to strive harder. It can motivate us to strive harder. Third, it can delight you with the joy of competition. A while back, we were driving back from the beach, and we had all 5 grandkids in the back, and I looked back, and Holden, the football player, had his helmet on. And he was reading a book, and I said, Holden, why are you wearing your helmet? He said, I've got the weight on here so I can strengthen my neck muscles, which actually is where a lot of the problems come for football players. That kind of motivation, delight you with the joy of competition. And fourthly, it may improve memory and strengthen immune system. So see the parallels, if you will. Trials, manageable trials, tests, stress, can have a good impact on us if we'll let them. Focus our attention, motivate us to strive better, delight with the joy of competition, and may improve memory and strengthen immune system. He goes on to say these three things. Remind yourself that stress or a trial is trying to help you. Secondly, use the stress or the trial as fuel for physical activity. Go walk or run. It will help you do stuff. And then 3, use the stress or trial to remind you to meditate. Use the stress or trial to remind you to meditate at least 25 minutes a day. In the devotional book, Jesus Calling, it said, I think 2 days ago, it said, I want you to view trials as exercises designed to develop your trust muscles. And all of us know, whether we do it or not, that strength training, strength exercises, is really important for us. And what it does is the stress of the lifting or the pushing or the whatever the particular thing is, puts stress on your muscles, almost breaks them down to the point where it strengthens your body. If we could see trials that way, this is what James is asking us to do. It's important how it works. So I'm inviting you to think holistically today, that just as it works in our physical being, in our emotional being, also our spiritual being. That's what James and Dr. Oz are both saying, interestingly enough, the same thing. So many trials are opportunities to exercise our trust muscles, to persevere, to gain maturity, and to gain wisdom. Wisdom. Trials, challenges, stress can focus our attention. When our kids were little, and we would go into Toys R Us or Target, we didn't have Target back then, and they would say, oh, I like that, or I like that, or I like that, or I like that. We had this way we finally hit upon when they're almost too old to learn from it, but we hit up on this. Okay, look, how about we'll go half. You pick one and we'll go half. You buy the rest, the other half. And what that did to them was that was a trial for them. They had to prioritize. They had to decide. They had to make decisions. They had to sort it out. They had to focus. They had to learn to take responsibility. And that's the goal of every parent, isn't it? To lead our children to a place of independence. And you do that by giving them little opportunities to make decisions all along. And in the process, they gain wisdom. Similar with consequences. We say, let's just understand, if you do this, this will likely result. Or if you do this, this will result. Consequences, which are a form of trial, rather than sort of growing up without any sense of consequences that come our way. In similar ways, God uses trials and challenges as us. One of you sent me or put on your Facebook a clip from a talk by Andy Stanley up in Atlanta about time and about gaining wisdom. And his was from a different perspective than James. It's from Psalm 90. Here's verse 12 from Psalm 90. Teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days so we can have a wise heart. In Psalm 90, it begins, that's the one that begins, God has been our dwelling place from all generations, from everlasting to everlasting. Thou art God, and 1,000 years is in your sight is like a day that has just gone by. The context is God's vision is from everlasting to everlasting, and then he goes to, but man is just dust. And we have just a little bit of time here, just a tiny little bit of time. So teach us to number our days, because the tendency for us is to look at life and time as if it will never end, and then we tend not to make certain decisions. We're different from God. And if we act like we have all the time in the world, like we're everlasting to everlasting, we don't focus, we don't prioritize, and we don't gain wisdom. But if we have a trial, a deadline, which is like a trial that James is talking about, then all of that changes because we're being taught to number our days, to realize our days are numbered and our time is limited, and so we make different choices. Let me give you a couple of examples. This coming Saturday is the opening Saturday for college football. I guarantee you that every football coach in the country, except Steve Spurrier and the coach of Texas A&M, who will play on Thursday night, have had this date circled on their calendars forever. The days are numbered. The trial is coming. The test is there. And everything is determined by that date. Getting things done, getting players coached up, getting who's going to be the quarterback, who's going to be the backup, all that stuff we've been reading in the paper. If there was no start date, this stuff wouldn't happen the same way. The coach and the team would act differently. Biggest challenge we hear about teenagers is they think they're immortal, and many of us still do that. And so they don't value deadlines, or they don't value caution. They don't tend to value sometimes wise decision. But James and Psalm are trying to teach us the value of a deadline, what it means to us, and a trial, and the numbering of our days, so we'll make our choices different. Ask any woman in here who's ever been a bride and planning your wedding day. You circle that day, and everything backs up from that. There's so many details. It's a lesson in numbering our days. John F. Kennedy in his early 60s says we're going to the moon by the end of the decade, and everything went into that because he'd set a date. Or our church a year ago, we'll pay off our mortgage by June 1st. Focus. What focus? And we had this amazing success. So I'd like you to think of a big trial you've had or that you're facing now. Not the kind that overwhelms you and overcomes you or has the threat of overcoming you, but trials that are manageable. Can you see it like strength training? As the weights stress your muscles they're strengthening them, can you see how the trial causes you to focus, to dig deep, to prioritize, to learn how to get through it? And in the process, you're learning wisdom, insight, and maturity. Years ago, I noticed something that happens very often. Maybe you've noticed this. With people who've had a heart attack and survived, who almost died but didn't. They've come through it. And something happens. Many times those persons have a significant change. They become kinder, more loving, more gentle, more caring, because the trial had let them see life more clearly and what really was important and what really matters. They were taught to number their days, that they didn't have forever to live, and that certain things they thought were important really weren't important, and they began to live differently. It happened that way for my dad. In many ways, a wonderful, wonderful, special guy, but after he survived his heart attack, he was a lot more expressive, a lot more kind in his wording, that sort of thing. Another person I've known who went through that was eager to express forgiveness to somebody who had wronged him. Wouldn't it be great if we could learn all that without having a heart attack or something hard like that? But for many of us, it's an artificial notion. Subconsciously, we do think we live forever, even though we're not. So if you knew you only had one more year to live, what would you do? What would you do differently? What would I do differently? What would you change? There's this person named Bronnie Ware who lives in, I think, Australia, another country. She's a nurse who's worked with hospice over many years, and over many years has studied and interviewed persons at their last 2 months or so of their lives. And she's written a book, or writing a book, about what she learned. And here are the top 2 regrets of people as she interviewed them in those last weeks of their lives, the top 2 things they wish they could do over again, what they would have done if they had maybe numbered their days, if they had embraced the trials of life and learned from them and persevered through them and gained the wisdom. This is what they came up with. 2 things, the top 2 things. The second one first. This is what they said. I would have changed things so I wouldn't have missed my kids' youth and my partner's companionship. Now, what she said was that they said I wouldn't have worked so hard. But I think what they really meant was this. I wouldn't have worked so hard so I wouldn't have missed my kids' youth and my partner's companionship. Because I know lots of you who work really, 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 really hard, but you also play really, really hard and are really focused. What they were saying is, I wish I would have prioritized things differently so that in addition to working hard, I would have not gone out with the guys so much. I wouldn't have done this. I wouldn't have done that. I would have. And so they wouldn't have missed their kids' youth, their partner's companionship. And then I thought that would be number 1, but the number 1 thing was this. I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself and not a life others expected of me. I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself and not a life that others expected to me. Your dreams and your hopes and your calling from God and not something others expect of me. If I don't do this, they won't like me. If I don't do this, I'll miss out. And so there you have it, direct from people who face the ultimate trial, who are fully aware that their days were numbered. This is their key wisdom. Stuff we could so easily avoid. Because when we fail to embrace our trials as the learning blocks God intends them to be, and we fail to number our days, we fail to realize that our days are limited, we fail to choose the things that really matter. Or a moral trial that we've come up against. Maybe we didn't do well from it. We learn from it. We ask God forgiveness, and we move on, and we gain wisdom. Or a spiritual trial, we come up against it. Maybe we didn't do well, or maybe we did, and we learn from it, and we gain wisdom. And through the school of hard knocks is how we phrase it. I'd like to close with the trial of the ALS Bucket Challenge, because it's a perfect illustration of our text from the book of James and also from Psalm 90. It reminds us powerfully to number our days, to realize that the challenges and trials of life can propel us to focus on what really matters, on the things that are important. On a little tiny scale, as I've contemplated this week, this day, all week long, and the ice being on me, it's focused my attention. It's taught me to value some important things, but that's just so minor. But the big thing is to number our days and value things that really matter. Earlier this week, Esther sent me a video of this fellow who started all this, Pete Freitas. And I almost didn't watch it because I thought, well, I know what's behind the Ice Bucket Challenge. But I watched it and was so inspired, because even though you and I might know a lot about the Ice Bucket Challenge, this video is so powerful and personable. Challenges me, and it'll challenge you. So let's watch that, and then we'll be ready for the ice bucket. Well, this may be funny, but wasn't that powerful? Honey, are you going to come up and pour? Oh, okay. Okay, good. She seems pretty eager to do that. Also, I've asked Becky Aldridge if she would come up and maybe help put the ice in the bucket. Would you, Becky? The reason I asked Becky is her husband was diagnosed how long ago, Becky? A number of years ago with ALS. Her husband's name is Rick. Don't put too much ice in there. And she told me he's doing really, really well. Becky? Becky. All right. At the end of this, Esther, would you give the benediction, or if we sing a song, or however you guys decide, because I've got a towel and I've got a robe because I'm going to get warm real quick. How
how long ago did your husband, come over here a minute, would you?
My husband was diagnosed, I think, in 1993. And that was after years that he was always tired. He just was exhausted every day, and it became worse and worse. And at some point we discovered he didn't have, his shoulder was hurting, and he just couldn't use that arm, which we had not even noticed. He worked until, let's see, 1993. He retired in 2000. He's still alive. He's doing well. He can walk. He can talk. He can eat. He can drive. He has about 4 hours of energy a day. So he wakes up at 9 in the morning most of the time. And I leave the room because I don't like to see him get dressed because it's very awkward. But he does everything himself. I try to help him as much as possible. I'm still working full time. And he's able to, I make sure there is food in the house. He can fix things himself. He's just incredibly fatigued. That is the worst for him. And I see where things are changing. Most people don't see it. And in a way, we are very grateful for him for that, because then people treat you more typical and not with pity. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
That was too long.
No, that was great. And her husband's name is Rick Aldridge, so we'll ask you to keep him in prayer. I'm going to do this in memory of Mom, who in 1996, May 28th, died of ALS. Her situation was so different than Rick's because it was in 2 months from diagnosis to her passing. But I only wish that I would have thought of something like this, that this Pete Freitas did, and I'm so grateful. I didn't know the numbers until Aaron told them today, $62 million. So in memory of Mom and in support of all who have ALS, and I would like to challenge Pete Johnson back there with the Ice Bucket Challenge.
Well, thanks be to God for this gathering and for this message. I don't know about y'all, but it spoke to me, and this video as well. Remember, the mission boxes are those wooden boxes, so if you can give, and let us continue to pray for all the folks affected by this. So as you go and leave this place, live like you have not a long time. Like this is your last day, and how that changes everything. It may be filled with grace, we pray, but so go in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in that way.